Or
All right, thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. As Suzanne said, this is the first webinar of the season. So we were here, I think our last one was in May or June, and so we're back for fall. We have another one this fall, November 10th, on fall pest prevention. Then we'll take a couple months off over the winter to and then we'll we'll be back in February with some spring gardening talks. So yeah, thanks for being here for tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about how fall is the best time for planting. So we will talk about the Our Water World program for those of you who are unfamiliar, and for those of you who are familiar, it'll be a review. We'll talk about IPM, or Integrated Pest Management. And of course, we will talk about why the fall season is the best time to add new plants to the garden. And we will help you give you tips on how you can set up your garden and your plants up for success so they can thrive over the winter months and be nice and hardy for spring and summer. Today, we are brought to you by the Clean Water Program of Alameda County, which is a program that works to protect Alameda County creeks, wetlands, and the bay from runoff that may carry pollutants into waterways. So related to gardening, that means avoiding chemicals that can be washed off the lawn and garden and into the storm drains by irrigation and rain. You can get news and information about events like this webinar if you sign up on cleanwaterprogram.org. There's a sign up on the right-hand side to get the newsletters. And you can learn more about gardening and pest management. We have done a ton of webinars with Alameda County, and they are all recorded and up on their YouTube channel. You can see just some of the recent topics, from soil, pollinators, veggie garden, roses, weeds. We cover a lot of different topics. So if anything that you want to learn more about, check that out on YouTube. And today, so here I'll share with you the Our Water, Our World program. We are a national award-winning program. It is a partnership with water pollution prevention agencies, so water districts, and retail stores. We are located in over 200 stores in about, I think, 20 plus counties across the state of California, and we are expanding. So our goal is water pollution prevention, and we provide integrated pest management education for retail associates and the public. In retail stores, you will see some of the items on the page, or on the screen, sorry, not the page, on the screen. On the right, we have a rack with information handouts that are in many stores available for customers to take. Some stores also have a QR code poster, so you can scan the codes and get that information right on your phone. And then many stores also have these blue tags on the shelf that highlight the eco-friendly products available to you. And we have all of that information and more at the Our Water, Our World website, ourwaterourworld.org. So why are we talking about waterways? So we all live in a watershed. A watershed is any size of, or any area of land that drains into a waterway. So it could be your backyard that drains into, the storm drain or a creek nearby. They can be as small as a yard, but they can also be as big as the San Francisco Bay Area. The Bay Area, San Francisco Bay watershed is the whole Bay Area, and all of that water drains into the San Francisco Bay. It's actually half of all the water that falls on California, either in rain or snow, ends up draining into the San Francisco Bay. As it moves from the mountains through agricultural areas and cities, urban areas, rural areas, it picks up a lot of material and brings that all into the different waterways that eventually drain into the bay. because everything we do out in our yards, on the street, walking our dogs, washing our cars, everything we do out in the street has a direct line to waterways through the storm drain. All water that enters the storm drain, with it debris and chemicals, etc., goes directly to a waterway. There is no filtration in between. It does not go to a treatment facility. So we really want to be careful what we're doing out in the world and make sure we keep as much toxic material out of those storm drains and out of the waterways. One way we can do that is talking about pest management. And what we practice at Our Water, Our World is called integrated pest management. We won't talk too much specifically about pests today, but I always like to give an overview of what we're talking about, see how it fits in to reducing pests. So integrated pest management is a decision-making process, and it's based on science-based strategies. We like to take a step back and look at the garden as a whole system, so kind of looking holistically at all issues. And then when we have issues, we want to ask a lot of questions. What is the problem at hand? So is it an environmental issue like watering, sun, space, or is it a pest issue? And if it is a pest issue, what pest is that? We really want to know what exactly we're dealing with, because then we'll be able to take the most effective, efficient action. Another question we like to ask is, can we live with it? A lot of pest issues are short-lived, or they don't cause a lot of damage. So maybe we can kind of just let them play out. And then some other issues we have maybe less of a tolerance for, so we do want to take action. In IPM, there's a few steps. First, we always focus on prevention. That's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Doing what we can to set up our gardens for success ahead of time, which will eventually prevent pest problems along the line. Then we have identification. If we do have a problem, again, we want to identify what is the problem, and if it is a pest, exactly what pest it is, so that we can properly take action. Some of the action steps in IPM are called controls, and there are 4 categories. There are cultural controls, which really focuses on bolstering the health of the garden, creating a good environment for plants, and a less good environment for pests. There's mechanical controls. Those are also called physical controls, because there are a lot of physical things like traps, barriers, and tools that we can utilize in the home and garden. There's biological controls, which is all about supporting the ecosystem of the garden, focusing a lot on beneficial insects and all of the beneficial bugs that do a lot of pest management for us. But beyond that, also birds, reptiles, and other mammals that might do some pest management for us, and understanding that relationship and supporting them in the garden. Then lastly is chemical controls, which are pesticides. In integrated pest management, we use them only as a last resort, and sometimes we choose not to use them at all, which is totally fine. And we always focus on the most eco-friendly option as possible. So today we're going to focus mostly on prevention and some things that are called considered cultural controls, because we're really going to focus on the health of the garden, and we're going to set our plants up for success by understanding why fall is a really great time to add plants. And I will share first up front why fall is a great time to add plants when you live in the Bay Area. Let me be clear about that. Many people love planting in spring, but that is a very more East Coast, Midwest mindset. So when we're talking about fall, for planting, we're talking about Bay Area, where we don't have a lot of frost and we have more wetter winters. So why is fall in the Bay Area the best time to plant? The shorter daylight hours will reduce stress on any new plants. Cooler evening temperatures also will keep the soil nice and moist, and also keep the soil cooler for those plants to get settled. We do expect wetter weather, knock wood here. When we expect rain in the fall and winter and early spring. That consistent moisture will help our plants really build up healthy root zones, as we'll talk about later. Fall is also over 8 months until the heat of the summer. So again, we're allowing plants to get established in the soil before they have the stresses of hot, dry summer. Same with the 10 months or more until the driest part of the summer, which is kind of upon us right now, or maybe it was more like last month. So again, we were setting up our plants now so that they have as much time as possible before the stress of dry heat is upon them. So all this time is time for establishment. So, and then I'll just share that in the Bay Area and specifically Alameda County, the driest months are, well, is July, but we still don't get a lot of rain in August or September. The hottest month is usually September. So we're putting in plants now in October. That's 10 or 11 months before the hottest and driest part of the summer.
Okay, so thank you, Charlotte. Thank you for that nice introduction. Now I am going to go through how to set our plants up for success. So one thing we can do is when we're adding new plants to our garden, we can choose California native varieties that are plants plants. Not all California natives, but plants that will be appropriate for our gardens that will require less water once established. Those are going to be climate appropriate and appropriate for our Bay Area microclimates. When we plant, we're going to group plant material together with similar water needs, so they can all share the same water needs with ease. We're going to water deeply and grow healthy roots, and then we'll be watering less frequently as those plants become established. We're going to maintain healthy soils and apply mulch to protect the soil and those root zones. We are going to work on keeping as much water on site as possible you can always think of the idea of slowing that water, spreading that water, sinking that water, or storing that water. And we're referring to the rains when those rains come. And then we're going to provide some regular healthy garden maintenance tips. So choosing climate appropriate plants. So here in the Bay Area, it's really nice to choose California native or Mediterranean native plants that can adapt to our summer dry climate. Okay, this is going to be plants that can really thrive during a winter rainy season and a very long, dry, warm season. We're going to match plants to the conditions of the garden to keep them from being stressed or susceptible to pest problems. So, which I'll share a little bit more how we would do that. And then we're going to choose pest and disease resistant varieties whenever possible. Nowadays on the market at the garden centers, there are so many really wonderful pest and disease resistant varieties that you can ask about. And then something else when we're adding plants to our garden, I'd just like to invite you to consider plants that can support the complex food web that surrounds us. And that's as small as the tiny micropollinators that we might even notice. We might not even notice buzzing around our flowering plants such as yarrow, or if our cilantro has gone to bloom, or butterflies moving through our gardens, and the other songbirds and hummingbirds that might pay our gardens a visit. They all are going to benefit from plants that can support them as well. And then for those of us that are looking to replace our lawns or to reduce the size of our lawn, or if we've got an area such as a parking strip or even a mow strip that we're looking to add some plants, there are some wonderful lawn substitutes. So these are going to be walkable. They are going to thrive with less water once established, using only a fraction of the water that a lawn, traditional turf lawn would need. And some of these, there are many. This is just a sample of a very tiny selection of 4 suggestions that are our favorites, but there are many, many, many lawn alternatives available for us to use. My 2 most favorites are on the bottom, the Diamondia, which has a beautiful yellow coin-like flower. When it's in bloom, it is really stunning, and it does knit together very tightly. It's a wonderful ground cover and very hardy, especially for baking hot areas of the Bay Area and the East Bay, Dublin, Pleasanton, Livermore, those areas. And then thyme, creeping thyme is another one of my favorites. The bees absolutely love it. It is definitely a pollinator magnet. And again, it is going to knit together and be extremely another heat toughie. It's going to really be able to thrive in extremely hot baking sun conditions. And these are just some resources that are going to also provide you with a nice lengthy list of plants that you can consider for lawn alternatives or for adding to your gardens. The Arboretum All-Stars is an amazing list of plants that are really going to thrive with less water and in harsher conditions. Really that hot baking sun, which so many of us experience. Bosqua, the Bay Area Gardening.org has an amazing list of plants that is going to be extremely appropriate for our Bay Area gardens. The California Native Plant Society, of course, will have a beautiful list. And I really like how they will also note what habitat it supports, as well as, if it provides, food for pollinators, food for songbirds, and so forth. It's pretty neat the way they have it keyed out. And then, of course, always referencing your local Master Gardeners chapter. They always have amazing resources on their website for us that will really focus on where we live. And then, of course, checking out your local garden center. There are so many wonderful garden centers and nurseries throughout Alameda County. Get curious if you get out there. There's a lot of new ones that are even new to me, and it's always fun to just looking at new plants, getting ideas, and talking to the knowledgeable staff. And then, so when I mentioned a moment ago about grouping plants together with the similar water needs, we're going to look at hydrozoning and plant selection. And we're going to, if we already have an established garden and we've got a couple empty spots that we want to add a plant to fill in that those empty spots, we want to understand what are the water needs of that plant once established, and if it's going to match the water needs of the existing garden bed. When we plant that plant or add those plants to that area, we are not adjusting the irrigation to match what we just planted. We're keeping that irrigation set up to water what is already established and existing. And what we're going to do is we're going to supplement those new plants. We're going to be watering those new plants either by hand or with a soaker hose or in some fashion that will not upset the rest of that planting bed. I hope that makes sense. We're also going to consider the microclimate needs of the garden. We're going to always group plants according to the sun, the shade, the heat, the wind, the grade of the soil type. So sometimes we'll have a part sun, part shade area of our garden, but part of that garden is up against maybe the wall of our house where the heat of that, the sun is going to actually radiate and actually be a little warmer for the plant. So that could be quite difficult to find a plant that can thrive in that type of environment. So we just want to keep everything in mind when we're introducing new plants to our garden. And then irrigation systems. Irrigation systems are really important, like how to water plants. I believe that this is one component that many of us don't consider is as complicated or can be as complicated as it is. What we like to share is that when we're watering plants, we want to, well, if we have an irrigation system, we are going to always adjust that irrigation system for the seasons. We're going to pay attention to those when we're getting shorter daylight hours, that water is not evaporating out as much as it would during longer daylight hours. So we will certainly be adjusting the system to maybe we don't need to water as frequently. We are also going to look at making sure that we're watering the systems, that these systems are running for a long enough period of time to actually penetrate that root system deeper down, and that we're not watering again until the top few inches of that soil is dry. Oftentimes when we have a nice layer of mulch, we're forgetting that maybe that soil is not dried out yet, and we're just in our own rhythm or systematically just leaving the system to run as if there was no mulch protecting that soil, reducing that evaporation rate. The best time to water our gardens is really going to be those sunrise hours, that 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. I see that a lot of water agencies and water districts have campaigns to water your gardens from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Or something similar to that. However, through the lens of integrated pest management and a pest management educator, boy, if you're watering in the middle of the night, it's going to really be attracting a number of pests such as slugs, snails, earwigs, and some fungal diseases. So please try to limit the watering until those early morning hours. We're always going to inspect our system for any leaks. And whenever possible, we're going to convert our pop-up sprinklers to drip irrigation, because drip irrigation is going to be a more efficient, more effective way to water. We're localizing where that water goes. We can target those root zones. We're seeing less water evaporation because that water is making direct contact with the soil. And if you'd like to learn more about watering and irrigation systems, you can view some of our previous webinars. We have one specifically just about how to water. I believe it's called Water Wise Gardening 101 or something like that. All right, thank you.
All right. And regardless of what your irrigation system is, whether it's, you and your hose or your watering can or a drip irrigation system, all of those are great and can be very effective and efficient if the watering is done correctly. So we want to encourage you to understand that when we are planting new plants, we want to use water to encourage a healthy root zone. And a healthy root zone is one that's going to grow out and down and really be deep, so that it has the ability to access more nutrients and more water in the long run, especially once those hot summer months come. Because the more strong and deep the root system is, it'll have more access. So to do that, we are going to water at the drip line. So we're going to water out the outer edge of the plant leaves. Think about rain falling off of that plant where that water is going to drip. So that's where the roots are. We're not directly watering right at the stem. We're going to expand our watering. And I want to share that also, even when we're planting drought tolerant or low water use plants, all of those plants are going to be drought tolerant and we use less water once established. That's a term we've been saying a few times tonight. Once established is, I like to think of it as like when they're adults, but when they're adults, they might be drought tolerant and they might only need water a few times a season. But until that point, when they're babies or teenagers, they're going to need more water to really get established in the soil. So again, we are not popping them in the ground and walking away because it says it's drought tolerant. We are still going to use our water to keep that soil more moist for those young roots and help them expand out and down and create a nice healthy root zone. This is another image or a few more images of, again, watering deeply and less frequently and at the root zone or the drip line, excuse me. The upper right is a picture of kind of a bird's eye view of a tree or a plant that shows the root zone expanding out beyond the drip line. And so we really want to irrigate all around to really help that root zone go out, out, out. And then we want to make sure when we are watering, we're watering deep enough to encourage those roots to go down. So we're not, think about, really understand your irrigation system or your hose, or think about how much water is really coming out of there and have, make sure it's actually traveling deeply into the soil and you're not just getting that top layer wet, because you need a lot more than that to encourage those roots to go down. And then you also, of course, want to wait between waterings to let your soil, the top inch or so, dry out between waterings. That does go for new plants as well. They need some dryness between, less again than an established plant, but sorry, I'm probably not making this very clearly. So we're still watering deeply. We're going to water more frequently and deeply when they're young plants, and then once they're established, we can really expand the time between waterings. But every time we water, we still want to make sure we're watering deeply. And some more ways to really set up your plants for success and keep that water in the soil is to focus on healthy soil, because healthy plants start in the soil. And one of my favorite ways to increase the health of the soil is to add compost. And compost, just so we're all on the same page, is organic material that has been broken down, decomposed by bacteria, fungus, microbes, worms, and other decomposers. It can be, you can make some in your own backyard, or you can get some donated, or you can buy it bagged from any store. Compost is great for soil because it improves your soil structure. It breaks up clay soil and creates pore spaces for roots, air, and water to infiltrate. And then if you have sandy soil, it's going to glue those particles together to hold on to moisture longer. Compost really turns your soil into a sponge, so it really increases the ability of your soil to, or ability of water to infiltrate the soil and then be retained in the soil. It increases the microbiology in the soil, which your plants need in order to receive water and nutrients. It can balance pH levels. It uses nutrients that are already out in the world from the decomposed matter, and will reduce need for chemical fertilizers and pesticides because it creates healthier plants. Few ways you can use compost for new plantings. Of course, you want to mix it into the soil. We're going to have, the goal is kind of like 10% organic matter in the soil. So you're not just planting your plants directly into a big pile of compost. You want to kind of add 1 or 2 inches of compost on top of your existing soil and mix it in that way. For existing plants, you can top dress or side dress. So that means just putting a layer of compost around the drip line and then allowing either the rain or any of your irrigation or watering to help those nutrients get into the soil. If you have mulch on your soil, you can also move the mulch away, put the compost down, and then put the mulch right on top of it. And then you can also make a compost tea, which is kind of how it sounds, soaking compost in water and spraying it on your plants or on your soil. Another way to increase the health of your soil is to use organic fertilizers. Organic fertilizers are fertilizers that are created from materials that were once alive. or byproducts of those things that are once alive: mushrooms, manure, compost, kelp, bone and blood meal. They are not derived from fossil fuels. They contain micronutrients and they are released slowly to the plants. So when you are using organic fertilizers, you're actually feeding the soil, and you are providing nutrients to the microbiology in the soil, which in turn feed the plant what the plants need when they ask for it. So there's kind of a relationship happening in the soil where the microbes are feeding the plants, because plants can't take up nutrients on their own, and they're asking those microbes what they need. So when you're feeding them in with organic fertilizer, they are going to get that nice variety of food. And in addition to the main, the 3 numbers on the front of fertilizers are talking about the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium that is in them, NPK. It's always in that order. You will always know what each of those numbers mean. It's NPK in that order. But organic fertilizers also have lots of micronutrients as well, because they are made from living things. So there are micronutrients in that. So they're going to be provided other things like iron, zinc, copper, boron, and more. And again, when we're reading the label, it's going to be NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, are those 3 numbers. A great way to remember what they do for your plant is remembering it's up, down, all around. So nitrogen helps green parts grow up. So that's the above ground growth. Phosphorus helps root growth and helps produce blooms, and then potassium helps all around well-being. So when you are planting these new plants, it is really beneficial to focus on using a fertilizer that's going to have higher levels of phosphorus, again, to help build that healthy root zone. And another tool we love in the garden for building healthy soil and having healthy plants is to use mulch. Now, mulch can be any material spread over the soil surface. We encourage the organic mulches, sorry, on the left, the bark, wood chips, leaves, straw. All of those organic mulches are going to add even more benefits to your soil. We do want to make sure that they are not placed within the first, I believe it's 5 or 6 feet of the home. No organic material, including wood chips, should be within that zone 1 area to reduce risk of fire. Yeah, so we're going to focus on those organic mulches. And reasons why we want to use mulch with our soil is because when soil gets really dry and doesn't see a lot of moisture, it becomes hydrophobic, which means that water is kind of repelled. It repels water. So you'll notice if you have a really dry area and you water it for the first time in a long time, water kind of just beads and rolls right off. We don't want that, because that will just make watering very challenging and create a lot of runoff for you. So mulch can help this. One, it's a cover, so it's going to prevent your soil from drying out and creating that crust. But also it helps water infiltrate better by holding it in place and allowing it to slowly infiltrate that dry soil. It also reduces evaporation significantly. I think Suzanne can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 2 to 3 inches of mulch on top of the soil surface can reduce your water needs by over 20%. And then it regulates soil temperatures, which is really important both in the summer and the winter. It keeps soil more evenly even and prevents those swings, which is really important for your root systems, especially those new plants that you're putting in the ground. They don't like big temperature swings. So when the temperature is nice and even, and especially if it's cooler in the summer, that's going to be really helpful to keep those healthy. Other benefits of mulch: it reduces soil compaction and erosion, so keeps that soil in place. It prevents weeds from germinating, and it does feed the soil as it breaks down. And chunky bark can provide habitat for beneficial insects, which we love. It is important to, when you are putting mulch down in your garden, that you keep it away from plant stems. So that means we're not putting it right up to the crown of the plant. We're going to keep it several inches away from that area to allow some space for airflow around the crown of the plant. If we put mulch right up against it, that could invite some diseases. And then another tool for building healthy soil is cover crops. So these are great for like unused veggie beds. Say you're done with your tomatoes and you're not going to plant anything for several months. We really want to keep soil covered. Soil stays healthy when it's covered. So covering it with either mulch, as I mentioned before, or cover crops is a great way to continue building the health of the soil even when you're not actively planting in it. So cover crops are different kinds of they're called, like, I don't know, cheaper plants. They are not like high value, I guess. I don't know how to say this without being offensive to cover crops, but because I think they're very valuable, but they're usually just grown to cover the soil and not so much for the products that they make or that they grow. So some examples are fava beans, clovers, soybean, flax, annual ryegrass. And so planting them in the soil now is going to protect the soil from damage and erosion, because all the roots from those plants are going to be infiltrated in the soil, holding that soil in place, continually feeding that soil throughout the months that you're not actively growing or fertilizing. It feeds the soil microbes throughout the winter. Some cover crops like fava beans and other legumes replenish nitrogen in the soil. They have little nodules on their roots that actually create nitrogen, and they put it into the soil, which is, of course, very important for our plant growth. And many of them have lovely flowers that can attract beneficial insects throughout the winter months. We do want to make sure that we're providing food for beneficials throughout the year so that they stick around. And then planting cover crops improves soil structure and water holding capacity, again, by increasing the organic matter, the microbial life in the soil, and keeping that soil in place with that root structure.
All right, now I'm going to talk about how we can keep rainwater on site when it starts to rain. We've thankfully already have received a little bit of rain this year, and I'm looking forward to hopefully getting more rain. But the idea is when we can take advantage of that rain and keep it on site as much as possible, then the plants we've just planted not only are going to benefit from what is immediately falling from the sky, but will also be able to take advantage of any water that we might be storing for future use. So think about it this way: as the rain falls from the sky, we want to slow that water flow. We want to avoid it running off of our properties out to the sidewalk, into the curb, and out to the storm drain. We want to capture it and be really greedy with that water. Okay, so think about that. And then we want to spread that water out however possible, which I'll give you a couple of suggestions in a moment. We want to allow that water then to sink into our ground so it can recharge deeper root zones, especially the root zones of our trees and our larger shrubs. And then we also want to store that water for future use. So preventing runoff is not only is going to benefit your garden and benefit your plants, it's also going to benefit our waterways. Okay, when we can keep water on site and direct it into areas of the garden that can then infiltrate into our soil, we are reducing the overload of this water as it gets into the storm drains. Many of us have seen when we've had significant rains, the curb at the corner, maybe that storm drain is plugged up with a bunch of leaves, and then that corner is kind of flooded and you have to find a dry way around the corner to walk across the street. All right, it's a familiar scene for all of us. Well, imagine if we were keeping as much of that water that fell on our properties so it could really absorb into the soil and go deep. Okay. Also, by keeping this water on site, it's not leaving our properties, so it's going to prevent any pollutants that could be contaminating the waterways. All right. And Charlotte mentioned earlier, those pollutants can look like maybe pesticides we've used around our properties that are invisible. We don't see them, but the residuals are going to be moving with that water. When we can keep water on site, we're preventing mulch and soil and other debris from clogging that storm drain. So those leaves from the trees that we didn't rake up and we have that significant rain, when we can keep that water on site, it's not going to move them to clog that storm drain on the corner, as I just mentioned. And then also when we're keeping that water on site, I can't share enough that it really supercharges our soils and keeps our garden really happy and healthy. We want to look at when we're doing any renovations on our properties, or changing walkways, or considering to add a new walkway or a driveway, really consider increasing the permeable surfaces whenever possible. We're going to look at gravel and dried laid patio materials and decomposed granite when we're not using that binding agent. We don't want to use that decomposed granite binding agent to make it solid. We really want to make sure that water is always able to move through these materials, because just because we have a walkway there, it doesn't mean that root zones are not growing underneath the path. Okay, that's just something to consider. It's also going to allow water to stay on site whenever possible and not move off that walkway or that driveway. And then something that I'm really excited about is the idea of planting a rain garden or a seasonal creep. And this is really cool. It's very easy and it's fairly inexpensive to create. So what a rain garden is when we've got rain falling on the roof of our house and it's coming down the drain pipe, or maybe it's going to a rain barrel or some type of rain catchment, and then there's going to be some overflow. Well, let's guide and direct that water to a basin that we've created in our garden that is not deep. We're not looking at a pond. It's going to be fairly shallow, I believe like 6 to 8 inches ish is what you can imagine. But what it's going to do is actually allow that water to stay put, spread out, and sink. Okay, so there's that that's that slow it, sink it, spread it, or spread it, sink it idea. And it's ideal to place these maybe in close proximity to a hedgerow of established trees and shrubs, or closer to some established trees. They don't have to be large. You can have multiple smaller ones. You can have larger ones, whatever is bestly suited for your garden and your landscape. We are going to plant these rain gardens with native plants that can thrive during the winter wet season, as well as the summer dry season. Some plants that are just examples of how the diversity and the color and the beauty that you can add. And again, this is just a very minimal list of all the plants that actually would thrive in a rain garden environment or a seasonal creek. These are just some plants that I have growing in my garden that I actually have created swales, or I can divert water so it can kind of stay without running off of my property. And then for some fall maintenance, some things we just like to share is that after a very productive summer food harvest time, we might have food that's out there on our plants, such as those tomatoes, those summer squash, maybe even the fruit trees, some of the apples. We haven't finished harvesting all those apples or pears, Asian pears and so forth. Persimmons are coming on. But what we want to do is before the winter season, before we really get into the winter season, we actually want to pick those food crops. We want to either finish eating them or preserving them or doing what we do, or get them off site or get them into our compost. But what we want to do is actually kind of address that we don't want food crops staying on our property unattended, because they actually can harbor pest problems. For apples, it could be codling moths, for instance, can overwinter in those apples, or they're going to attract other pests. During the warmer months, we might see yellow jacket activity. But now and throughout the year, we definitely see rodent activity, but it also can attract other things, like skunks, possums, raccoons, and so forth. So just manage the food crops and harvest them if we're done with those food crops, or, make sure we're keeping up with the harvest as throughout the season. And then if we have any plants that have diseased leaves or limbs, or diseases on the fruits or flowers, it is important to take those diseased leaves or limbs or plant parts and actually dispose of them in the municipal green waste bin. It is not advised that you keep them on site or put them in your home compost. From experience, what we can share is that our home compost systems typically do not get hot enough for long enough to kill those pathogens. So it is best to put them in the municipal waste bin and have the municipal compost systems take care of it, since they do get hot enough for longer periods of time to kill those pathogens. We are going to look at doing some selective mindful pruning. And what I mean by that is we're going to look at any, so on fruit trees, some ornamental trees, but primarily fruit trees, what we see is out of nowhere, there's just a big long branch that just grew. We call these whips. We want to prune these whips, or we want to prune any parts, any limbs that might look a little vulnerable. And what I mean is that as the winter season comes on, and if we have a significant windstorm, which is not unusual, we want to avoid any limbs from breaking or getting ripped in a significant wind, because when that branch gets ripped off the tree or breaks off the tree, it's actually going to cause a lot of stress and damage to that tree. We also want to avoid any limbs that might fall on a structure, such as a fence or a shed, a garage, or the home. But what I mean by selectively pruning or really mindfully pruning is that we're just doing very light kind of preliminary pruning. And then for our deciduous fruit trees, we're typically looking at January to prune those. Our evergreen trees will be pruned according to the time that's appropriate for them. We're going to fertilize with a very low nitrogen fertilizer this time of year as we move towards winter, because we don't want to encourage a lot of growth. Remember, Charlotte mentioned the up, down, all around. And since nitrogen is the above ground growth, we don't want to encourage a lot of above ground growth at this time of the year. For fear of an early frost that can actually cause some damage to any new growth. So we're looking at fertilizing this time of year with a lower nitrogen fertilizer that can really feed that plant through the winter months and really focus on developing happy, healthy root zones. And then, as Charlotte mentioned, we want to plant cover crops to protect the soil throughout the garden. And this is going to be in any maybe vegetable beds that we have already cleaned up from the summer months and transitioned. And instead of letting them lay bare, we're going to actually plant cover crops. And one of my most favorites is actually fava beans. They're very easy. You can find them at a lot of your local garden centers. They grow very successfully, and the benefit is that we can trim off and harvest about the tips 3 inches of the tips we can saute with some garlic and some sesame oil. It's delicious. So not only are the cover crops supporting the soil, but you actually get to enjoy them as a delicious vegetable food. And then I mentioned earlier irrigation maintenance. This is really important. It's nice for us to really check in with our irrigation systems for those of us that have them, and understand that we are at the end of a long summer. We are into the fall, but we still have pretty much very warm, dry days. And it is not unusual for critters to chew on irrigation pieces to access more water, or from digging in our garden over the summer months. Sometimes we nick the irrigation and there could be a leak. So please go out and inspect your irrigation systems and make sure, one, that the water is going where it needs to go around that drip line, and two, that we don't have any unexpected leaks that could be wasting not only a lot of water, but costing us a lot of money. And then when possible, consider, for those of you that have sprinkler pop-up systems, convert your pop-up sprinklers to drip. There are a lot of amazing rebates out there for different water districts. I would have a look at, depending where you live, Valley Water, East Bay Nursery, so forth, even Basqua, they will have a list of rebates. But when we can upgrade our irrigation systems or consider switching from pop-up sprinklers to drip, we are going to do ourselves a huge favor by not only saving a lot of water, we're going to be saving a lot of money and time, because the time will be replacing plants that did not succeed the way we thought because our irrigation systems failed or were not set up properly. So those are just some things to consider. And then I wanted just to add a couple more benefits for capturing water. Stephanie, I hope you don't mind, but I just love this picture of you and your giant cisterns on your very modest property. It's so incredible and very inspiring, but you don't have to go large, you can go small. And what I love about these 55-gallon rain barrels pictured in the lower left corner of the blue rain barrels is that you can daisy chain them together. So you might start with 1 or 2 at a time, and over a course of a couple of years, you can daisy chain them together, and it's a very easy way to be able to capture a lot of water. Of course, there's sizes and shapes for every household, property, and budget. So, get curious, go check them out at your local home improvement center, farm supply, and so forth. But I can't share enough that it's just amazing to me that 1 inch of rain over 1,000 square foot surface, such as your home or your garage or a shed, you can capture over 600 gallons of water. Okay. And so if since now we're getting these atmospheric rains, these crazy storm systems that can dump, 8 inches at a time. Well, gosh, that's a lot of water that we can capture, that we can use in our properties for future irrigation purposes. And then laundry to landscape systems are very economical and very easy to install. Many of the water districts are offering rebates for this as well. It's an excellent way to get water out to, again, those deeply rooted trees and shrubs, fruit trees and vines, anything that really likes to get a large volume of water at a single time. It's going to be ideal for our clothing washing machines that can channel the water out to the garden. There are some caveats. It's not for everybody. It's not, it won't work for every home, but it will work for a number, a very large variety of homes and gardens. So please check that out. It's, like I said, it's very easy, very economical, and you can learn more at greywateraction.org. Some online resources that we love to share with you is going to be the Our Water, Our World website for some pest management support. You can also check out the UC statewide IPM program website. This is an online database for identifying pest problems, learning how to grow plants with a little bit with some tips and tricks and some suggestions. There's newsletters that you can sign up for. The quarterly newsletter is amazing, and it really gives us a lot of support around what's going out there, with our plants, with our pest problems, or just with some things that we might see. Bugguide.net is a really cool resource. If you happen to have an insect in your garden and you can't identify it, I always like to go to bugguide.net so I can properly identify the insect to make sure it is a pest and not a beneficial insect. And then I've got some pesticides lying around and I can't remember how they are, what their mode of action is, or how I'm supposed to use them, or what they might be used for. You can always go to the National Pesticide Information Center. The UCIPM also has information on pesticide active ingredients, and those are going to be great resources. I'd like to thank you for joining us. I'd like to remind you that we will be meeting here on, was it November 10th? At same time, same place, and we'll be talking about fall pest prevention. So if you've got questions, you can register for the webinar, and then in the confirmation, you will get an email that will provide you with a way to ask any of your questions. You can email me and let me know what questions you might have, what pest problems you'd like us to address during that program. So I'd like to thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Charlotte, any questions that have come up, or I know I answered a couple.
I answered one, but oh, someone raised their hand.
Great.
You're welcome. I'm sorry, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. Bushra, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question, that's fine.